Hello everyone, this is 𝗔𝗲𝗴𝗰𝗆 and welcome to Legacy Links. This series is about bridging eras. Each episode links a historical figure from Luxembourg's past to someone working in the same field today. Together, they reveal how legacy, identity, and place continue to shape who we are and who we are becoming. Hi everyone, this is 𝗔𝗲𝗴𝗰𝗆 and in this special episode we are zooming out from individuals to nations, looking at 55 years of Australia-Luxembourg relations through the eyes of someone shaping that relationship today. From wartime connections and cultural crossovers to cutting-edge collaborations in space, climate and innovation, the story of these two countries is richer and more relevant than it might first appear. Our guest today is Australia's ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg, the EU and NATO, Angus Campbell. In this conversation, we explore the legacy of this diplomatic bond, the opportunities frozen on the horizon, and what it means to represent a nation in a world that is constantly evolving. Thank you for coming here today in this crispy, almost November morning. You were appointed 10 months ago, weren't you?
10 months, Julie. Middle of January. Arrived on a very grey, foggy day and cold. Quite a shock from a beautiful blue sky Canberra summer into completely a different environment, but a fascinating one.
Okay. Define fascinating.
I cover that breadth of Belgium, Luxembourg, EU and NATO at a time in the world where so much is changing, and I find Europe is at the centre of much of that change in the relationship between great powers, in the conflict that we see in Ukraine and its implications both for Ukraine, for Europe and for the world, in the manner in which Europe is seeking both to develop and integrate, but also to remain and identify locally, nationally. The European project is never complete, and it's a continuing adventure, and Luxembourg is one of its original advocates. And I think they can be very, very proud of how Luxembourg was there at the creation and continues to be so, driving forward.
Yeah, that is very true. I feel like Luxembourg had a very strategic mindset, I should say, when they decided that, agrarian economy, agrarian society, that is not going to get us very, very far. So we need to be strategic here. And what I know, Luxembourg is one of the founding countries, effectively, of the European Union. That is spot on, I would say. So this is your first time working full-time in Europe, isn't it?
Oh, that's right, yeah. So my background is a career as a military officer, completed duties as Australia's Chief of Defence Force in the middle of 2024, and then was invited to take up this role with a little bit of polishing from our diplomatic service, landing in January. Yes, the first time here in Europe, working in Europe, and the first time as a diplomat. It's a great adventure, and, hopefully I'm making a contribution, and I'm certainly learning a great deal.
Definitely, but I mean, you've been in public service pretty much your entire life.
That's right.
And it is public service, but I imagine that it's drastically different compared to your military career. The way you need to show up, the nature, the character of the day-to-day must be very different. Can you talk to me about the differences? What was the culture shock when you stepped into this role?
I think there's actually a lot more similarity than differences from senior service in militaries and diplomacy. And the commonality is actually what you're trying to do is defend and deter. You don't actually want the war.
Right.
And so the effort that goes in to try to mitigate that possibility and prepare for it necessarily because it's the worst case option. And so I think through a military career, your skills change from tactical and operational to more strategic and military diplomatic. So I certainly engaged with many counterparts right across the world, from Pacific Island nations, North Asian nations, South Asian nations, Middle Eastern and European nations, North American, through my career. And in diplomacy, of course, you're at the cutting edge of seeking to build a world people prefer peacefully. And that is a challenge because you're asking people from so many different backgrounds, cultures, experiences, and histories to find a way to say yes to a next step forward, to see where they have common interest and to invite them to let go of issues that matter but are not primary to the cause and benefit of a future opportunity for everybody. It's a fascinating world, and everyone produces or contributes a small part to a big puzzle.
I wanted to ask you about the remaining 2 years. Reflecting now on almost 1 year that you've been in the role and 2 years that are upcoming, what are your thoughts?
The events that are unfolding in Europe in terms of building Europe's future as a secure continent, as an innovative continent, as an energy and climate transition continent, all of those are of great interest to Australia. And to understand how we can be part of that story and how Europe can contribute and be part of our story. Because security and the sense of prosperity that emerges from security, that is something that we all desire. At the same time, we're challenged by the issues of climate change and the need to decarbonise, but to do it in a way that enables industrial innovation and indeed encourages industrial innovation. And while all of that is going on, look to see how we can contribute to building the sorts of secure, resilient supply chains and economic systems that we see were so challenged during the period of the pandemic, where the sense of comfort and confidence was fragile. We don't want to see that. We, as a trading nation, Australia as a trading nation, a nation deeply embedded into an international rules-based order, we see so many opportunities working with a community of nations that are together a standard-setting group of nations about normative behaviours, human rights, liberal democracy, and the opportunities of collaborative trade. So in the next few years, we are currently negotiating a free trade agreement. I'm keen, as many are, to see that concluded. Keen and hopeful. Similarly, the European Union has invited us to enter into a security and defence partnership. And these two perspectives on building a complex web of relationships. Now, in bilateral terms, Australia and Luxembourg, Australia and Belgium, we have been very close friends and partners in values, in interests, in commitment to human rights, to peace and security. These things have been as one between our nations for a very long time. So you'll see in multilateral fora, in the United Nations, often in peacekeeping operations or in activities where we have a common trade interest, we work very, very closely together. And I want to encourage and to continue that. There's a vibrant, innovative sense of technological opportunity that you can see in many small startups here and elsewhere in Europe, as well as in Australia, connecting those ideas together, connecting them with finance, with industrial weight, and with enthusiasm and support from government. Really important to create a future that's one we can all be very proud of.
Very promising, and it's such a great segue, I think, to talk about we just celebrated 55 years of the diplomatic relations between Luxembourg and Australia. And what you've been talking about, the relationship has been developing over the last 55 years. Now, I think with your appointment, there's a revival. Well, first of all, the event was great. I loved it. It's a great venue, really well organized, great people, great speeches by yourself and by the minister. It was just such a welcoming and home-like atmosphere. From your perspective, the question, I guess, is that from your perspective, it's not about 55 years being 55 years. It's about 2025. Why is it now the relevant time for Australia to expand the focus and continue developing or maybe deepening the relationship with Luxembourg?
Look, that's a really interesting question. And last night, as you mentioned, we held a reception to acknowledge 55 years of diplomatic relations. And we were greatly privileged to have Minister Roth, the Minister of Finance from Luxembourg, come as our principal guest. and to speak. In his opening remarks, he reflected on Luxembourg's innovation, its financial heft, its common interests and values, and the sense that Luxembourg desires to see 5% of its GDP emerging from space technologies. And really that's emerging from the cutting edge of technological innovation. It combines extraordinary insights in the digital revolution with the mechanical engineering and the sophisticated systems engineering to be able to operate in the harshest environment in space. And what a great aspiration for a nation that, as you mentioned, previous leaders in earlier times had recognized Luxembourg's opportunity to develop a significant satellite capability under the SES company's badge, based here in Luxembourg and operating globally. Very, very impressive, but now creating an ecosystem that has around 700 space technology-related startups and medium-sized companies operating from and established in Luxembourg. In Australia, a very similar, perhaps smaller, but similarly aspirational ecosystem is emerging in high-tech and particularly in space tech. And I think for both countries, the reason we emphasised last night the linkage by talking about the space technology linkage is because it so epitomises the energy, the willingness to take risk and to explore and create something new that space is all about. And that so many of those technologies then flow into the rest of life. And so our emphasis was about how two countries on the other side of the planet can see and build these connections in one area of technology. But of course, the decarbonising clean energy story is another area of technology. And there's so many parts of our economic relationship and our technological potential that could be very empowering and beneficial to both Australia and Luxembourg and to the communities and the nations that we also partner with in our own regions. So I think it's a really good metaphor for an exciting future and one I want to encourage.
Definitely. This is so well put. And I find that Luxembourg, being such a small nation, usually not a lot of people in the world outside Luxembourg know where Luxembourg is and what it is about. A lot of people think that, which is true, it used to be part of Belgium territorially, and a lot of people still think that it's probably like related to Germany or France or Belgium. But it's in the heart of Europe for pretty much anything. And it can be considered perhaps as a landing pad, like a gateway to Europe. I think that for Australia, that's pretty much what you've been talking about, how it's been considering Luxembourg. At the same time, you're based in Brussels. There might be benefits, there might be lack thereof. Can you talk to me about how we can maybe more efficiently focus on maintaining maybe the relationship and strengthening it, being physically in two different locations?
So I try to get down here pretty regularly, and it's a nice drive. It's easy to get down here. But at the same time, the embassy is in electronic conversation with officials here in Luxembourg very routinely. And we have a fantastically active Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce in Luxembourg organisation that is similarly engaging, raising issues both with Luxembourg and with Australia. And so I think there is a pretty vibrant conversation and an effort to maintain and continue that conversation. What I was pleased about was some of the conversations last night, linking and creating linkages between SME technology companies here and either subsidiaries in Australia or Australian companies that were reaching out in both directions to try to grow that relationship. And we very much encourage it. So I think it's not necessarily about physical locality, but more about consciousness of mind and using the tools that modern society provides, one of which I'm using right now, to encourage and continue a really beneficial conversation that leads to practical outcomes for our two countries.
You've been talking a lot about traditional diplomacy, which obviously this is your job. When it comes to your diplomatic relations, one angle is soft diplomacy, which is not obvious, not direct. People's relationships, personal relationships, businesses, trade, which can be considered also as direct diplomacy, but depending, I guess, on how you define it. Communities, maybe some cultural societies can be considered as agents of that soft diplomacy. We have the Chamber of Commerce here in Luxembourg, Australian New Zealand Chamber of Commerce, that started being quite active recently with grand plans, I must say, to expand its own activity, to engage individuals, expats from Australia and New Zealand, to participate in some sort of relationship building here locally. I see limitations simply because we're so far from Australia. In terms of trade, in terms of, again, people just simply coming here, moving here from there, or vice versa as well. At the same time, with everything that you've already talked about, there's so many opportunities. From your perspective, the question, I guess, is how to show you people on the ground, so to say, that grand potential and how to help them or engage them into building this relationship.
We are physically on the other side of the planet, but anyone who travels to Europe, I'd absolutely recommend coming to Luxembourg. Beautiful, both the city and also the country. Full of history and, as we've discussed, full of modern innovation and energy. And the Australians that I've met here, they are very complimentary and enthusiastic about life in Luxembourg and life, as you say, in the middle of Europe. Like you, I do think that leaders, countries, communities, industries, at all these levels, there are relationships that create diplomatic effects in a variety of fashions, and that create the relationships that are the product of a quiet diplomacy. So with the Chamber of Commerce, with the government here in Luxembourg, with the EU and its institution building for the European project, and with personal connection, those are all mechanisms that I and colleagues from the embassy are seeking to utilise to develop this bilateral relationship and to remind that digitally we're about 130 milliseconds away from Australia. And in terms of physical flights, we're about 21 hours away. That's not so much fun, but at the other end, it's worth being here. And then there is a community all across Europe, as in an Australian community, that is active in business. Luxembourg is becoming, as I've noted, a draw on space technology interest. It's also historically been and remains one of the largest focal points of global financial investment. And these in combination, the entrepreneurial startup and the resources for investment with a government that's enthusiastic for innovation, it's the kind of environment that is attractive not just to an Australian or to an Australian entrepreneur, but to many. And so I think it's this steady work at these multiple levels to build connection and to see what we do see, which is a growing, measurable result. So since 2020, Australia's investment into Luxembourg has doubled. Now it's still, I describe it as a modest 24 billion euros of investment from Australia into Luxembourg. We can see more because it's growing. Luxembourg's investment into Australia is around 71-ish billion euros per annum. And naturally, as an Australian, I think that could dramatically grow and we'd be very happy with that. But the point is, by working steadily at multiple levels, if you measure just in the tangible issue of euros, this relationship is growing and it can keep growing. And there's a lot of possibility. And I think that there were cards being exchanged last night, different businesses and people being introduced to companies or projects that they did not appreciate and were very interested in following up on. So I'm quietly optimistic and I'll keep doing my part. And what I like, though, is that I see at many levels everyone feeling interested to do their part. And that ultimately is what makes it an enduring success. One of the points that the Chamber of Commerce raised, and also Minister Roth raised in his remarks, was the continuing interest from both countries to see the development of a double tax agreement, which facilitates the financial trade relationship. This is something that's ongoing between Luxembourg's finance department and the Australian Treasury. It's a complex issue. I don't deal with the details. I am not a taxation expert, but I know that it is something that Luxembourg has with many countries, Australia has with many countries. And I could assure you both from Minister Roth's speech, from the comments he's made to me separately, from the good advocacy of the Australia-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce in Luxembourg, and from individuals and businesses, this is definitely on the minds of Australians and of Luxembourgers. And so part of my job is to facilitate the connection, the engagement, and the opportunity for the two groups of experts to come together on this issue.
Yeah, I think the revival of the Chamber of Commerce here in Luxembourg coincided with the revival of the DTA, because the conversation started a very long time ago, not just this year or like last year, but it's definitely one of the main activities of the Chamber. If this comes through a successful operation at some point, all of these potent opportunities that you were talking about, it can obviously facilitate that a lot, I think.
So, Julia, I can assure you, you're but one of a number who have emphasised that to me. And fair enough too. I want to assure you that from the point of view of an ambassador's role, which is to understand, to advise, to connect and communicate, this is very much something I am doing. Complex issues, the governments of Luxembourg and Australia ultimately will be the deciders, but the message is being heard and it is being communicated. I would also add, importantly, the European Union-Australian Free Trade Agreement, which I hope is in the latter stages of its negotiation. That will also be, for Luxembourg, as much as for all of the other members of the European Union, a very significant opportunity. It is aspiring to be a comprehensive trade agreement, and anything that promotes and encourages freer trade, multilateral approaches to trade, the sense that we are all richer by trade, I think is going to be good for everybody. So I'm also very keenly encouraging, advocating, supporting the delivery of a free trade agreement.
We've talked a lot about Luxembourg, Luxembourg's point of view, European point of view. Let's maybe switch to Australian. What I wanted to ask about was, living in Australia, I did not think that I would ever be in Luxembourg at some point. Just fate, just so happened. What I want to lead to was in relation to the startup and the business community in Australia specifically. I used to have a startup, and there's a very particular approach to how you're supposed to build a startup and develop it, and then the business community and the startup community down there wants you to scale very, very quickly and then go overseas. There are several initiatives, there are trade missions in each state that can facilitate and help you take your startup anywhere, and that anywhere, in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, is the UK. If you want to scale to Europe, if you want to go to Europe, pretty much UK is the only way to go. Then, if it applies to you, then you can maybe see from there. But the direct avenue, that's London. There are two things to that. The first is it's quite difficult to scale a business internationally, especially overseas, especially so far. And there's quite a bit of reluctance, but not because they do not see the opportunities, the startup founders, but because it requires a lot of investment, a lot of effort, a lot of time, resources. And this is something that is quite hard to get by, because the investment landscape in Australia is quite difficult to get into, and then to get the investment itself. So that is the first angle. The second angle is speaking about Europe, and this is what I was leading to. In relation to Luxembourg specifically, not a lot of people know about Luxembourg, or maybe they know about Luxembourg, being the country, but what Luxembourg has to offer, I feel like it will require, especially once the DTA, fingers crossed, is finalized, a great deal of marketing down there on the ground, that now we have this opportunity and let's use it, What do you think about that?
I met in this role now quite a number of small startups aspiring to be very large companies with great ideas. And what's impressed me both here in Europe and also in Australia is the number who are desiring to do it without simply having a great idea, getting to a sort of a startup position and then selling out. and seeing their idea absorbed into a much larger, very consolidated and existing company. That they want to build, they want to create. And my point to both is to believe, not that the road will be easy, it will be so hard, but the journey and the possibility will be so extraordinary. What does Luxembourg offer to someone who's thinking about coming to Europe? Because Europe represents a community of 450 to 500 million people, million consumers, advanced, developed societies, liberal democracies. And with a simplification agenda in the European Union and a recognition from the Draghi report all across Europe that the need to encourage and drive innovation and simplify regulation wherever possible. What does Luxembourg present? It's not just a place that is at the centre of Europe, a place where you can operate comfortably in English until you learn other languages, but also a country which I think I saw an estimate that Luxembourg's collective investment financial sector has about 7.4 trillion euros. Now, that's spread all over the world, and of course some of it here, but there's no shortage of money for a bright idea, and that's pretty attractive. Of course, yes, there are centres of innovation and so forth that you see in the UK. Everyone knows about Silicon Valley in the US. There's 𝗕𝗵𝗶𝗆 in Belgium, where radio pharma companies like Australian company Telix have based, because it's a collection of expertise across radionuclear pharmacy and pharmaceutical medicine. Here, this cluster growing with a nationally declared aspiration of 5% of GDP from space technologies. You know, if I was a space technologist in Australia and I'd be looking around, I was thinking, you've got the government support here, you've got potential significant financial investment, you've got already bright innovation, and you're going to be bringing more of it. So at that point, when Australian companies think we need to reach out further into the world, then yes, Luxembourg, there's a whole lot that's attractive. At the same time, I want Australian companies to grow and be great Australian companies and to be global Australian companies, just as Luxembourg has encouraged and sees, and I'm thinking again of SES, as a globally known, substantial company that has a real sense of its Luxembourgish identity. And in both cases, these are really attractive possibilities for the future. You know, you have lived in Australia and you live in Luxembourg. There aren't as many grey days in Australia. Luxembourg is a fantastic country, so is Australia. I rate them equally, and I think the opportunities for both innovation and investment and collaborative innovation is very real. So let's see more of it.
This sounds very encouraging, and I agree 100% with you. And yesterday, during the evening, I also was speaking with some people. I was given the example of how whenever I speak about Luxembourg and Australia, Luxembourg reminds me of Australia a lot. In the way, not in terms of the weather, in terms of how life is organized, all the systems, processes, getting down to the basics, booking an appointment with a doctor or dealing with your taxes. It's all pretty straightforward. The complication may be the language, which is French. However, like you already said, it's not impossible to live just with the knowledge of the English language here. And people get very surprised when they hear that, because it was a positive surprise when I realized that life is so comfortable here, just like it was in Australia for me when I used to live there. So to my earlier point about marketing, you've just done that. So this is our first attempt at marketing of Luxembourg for Australia, for Australians.
Very good. And I hope that I might have encouraged people to think that they too could own a surfboard.
Oh, you need to go to the Netherlands for that.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking you come to Australia for that.
Oh, yeah, well, the 21 hour of travel.
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, in my experience, I think it would be like 24, 25, but depends how you structure the travel. Those who are listening, fear not. I mean, it's worth it. It's worth every minute of this travel.
Now, you won't be surprised if I think it's the best country in the world.
It is.
Well, Julie, that's very kind, given that you're a Luxembourg resident. But I think that instead of competing about, which country is better or not, we should recognize that when we collaborate together, when we work together, countries, communities, industries, we're stronger, we're more prosperous, there's so much that is beneficial about, instead of the mindset of competing, the mindset of collaborating and cooperating. And I think there's two nations that can benefit from that approach and buy a surfboard.
Well, on this very positive note, I think we can wrap up the interview. Angus, thank you so much for coming, honestly, and making the time in your busy schedule. And maybe the last bonus question. Well, before the bonus question, there's another question. Have you tried any of the Luxembourgish cuisine?
I have. I like to explore and have as much of whatever is local as possible. The food here is very good, and the culture behind it is very interesting. And so, yes, I have had Luxembourgish meals. I'm not going to get into the terrible place of declaring a choice of one rather than another, but to say everyone should try it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, my bonus question was, would you rather go for the Belgian fries or the Luxembourgish? And okay, don't take my word on that. I'm not very skillful at pronouncing 𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗀𝗄𝗃. The 𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀 is a potato thingy. It's like a pancake, potato pancake.
I know it well.
Okay, voila.
And because I am now a skilled diplomat, supposedly, my answer, of course, is, can I have one of both, please? They are both world cuisine delights, and I've enjoyed them both.
Yeah. Okay, well, now I am very pleased with this answer. So thank you again for coming. And I wish you a great rest of the day. I hope it's going to be sunny.
It's been my pleasure. And thank you very much, Julia. And my best wishes to you and all your listeners and your viewers. And of course, to the wonderful people of Luxembourg.
Thank you.
Thank you.